Thanks so much for tuning in. This week, for the first time in a while, we're not going to look at a new song. What we're going to do today is we're going to start working on the final steps toward the release of the EP. So right now we're about to talk about mastering. Now there's a lot of videos on YouTube about mastering already, and I'm not saying I'm a mastering engineer. What I'm going to show here is that we can get a cohesive and balanced EP just by doing a bunch of small things, and this way we can make sure that each song flows well into one another. So let's start right here. Here are all the tracks that I've got for mastering. The first thing I want to point out is, like I said in the last video, those are not mixed. We're keeping them pretty raw to follow the style of lo-fi, chill, hip-hop music. Obviously, I would never do this for rock or pop music. So yeah, let's look right away at what I'm doing. I'm about to explain quite a bit of stuff, so if you want to jump right away to the mastering, I'm going to put stamps in the video so you can skip through this part. So the first thing you want to do with a session like this is choose the song order unless it was already defined. In my case it was not. So the way I go about this is I'll choose a first and last song. I like to have at least one of those two being my favorite. And then what I'm going to do is I'll place the other songs accordingly to those. What does this mean? This means I'll listen to the ending and starting chunks of the songs, and I'll see which one fits another. So for example, so we have a fade out ending with some bird noises. And we have some kind of synth piano kickback for the other one, a fade, and a cool little entrance afterward. Those are things that work. In the end, pretty much anything could work as long as the intent makes sense, the choice makes sense. When you got the order of your songs right, the next thing to do would be to actually make everything the same loudness. In Cubase, I can actually normalize by LUFS. LUFS is a loudness unit, and what I like to do is normalize everything to minus 32 LUFS, including the reference tracks. I'll talk about those a bit later. Obviously that's in Cubase, so if you don't have this, what you can do is just do a peak normalize. That's pretty much in any DAW that exists, and then just readjust everything to make sure that the loudness that you hear is about the same. Now it won't be perfect, but it should be a good starting point. I just talked about reference tracks. If there's one thing you should remember from this video is that when you're mastering, use reference tracks. Unless you've been doing this for years and you're in a super fancy listening space that's super precise and you trust 100%, you should absolutely use reference tracks. It's much safer and it's much easier. You can see here are my reference tracks. I'm not going to play them back just for copyright reasons. I wouldn't want my video to get taken down. But what I like to do, I just get a 30 seconds chunk from it that represents the whole song, and I'll use this chunk for my referencing purpose. Basically, how I choose them is I'm going to listen to some records that I really like, and I'm trying to find songs in those records that have similar vibes to the project I'm working on. Now, when you have your reference tracks, you'll have to normalize them just like you did with the others. Those are already mastered, so they'll be much louder when they peak at the same level as the other tracks. So you have to make sure that you do adjust their level afterwards so that the loudness that you hear is about the same for your reference and for your own tracks. When this is done, what I'll do is I'll take all my tracks and I'll bus them to a master bus. I'm then sending my references and my master bus to the stereo out. I'll show just one of them, but the processing is pretty much the same for all of them. We can see here in my console. They're pretty much, some of them have maybe one more thing than another, but those are pretty much all the same treatment going on. So the first thing I do, especially since they're not mixed, I'll start with a compressor to get some attack out of the tracks. So just a compressor with very slow attack and very fast release. Next up, this is a trick that I've worked on over time. So where you can see I'm just doing some general EQ with this first EQ. But the one after, you'll see, yeah, I'm actually doing some treatment separated on the mids and the side. You can see an S here and an M here, means mid and side. How I work at this point is on my stereo out, I have a mid-side plugin and I have an EQ. They're actually just used to filter out everything for both the reference tracks and my own tracks. And what I'm doing is, for example, I'll listen to this reference track. Now I won't do it for copyright reasons, but I would mute the mids and I would cut all the lows so I can focus only on the high end of the sides. And what I'll do is I'll compare the high end of the sides from this reference track, from actually the 3 reference tracks I have there, and I'll try to adjust my own track going with what I hear from those 3 references. So yeah, it's a bit funky, but you get used to it from doing it. I'll show a bit how I do this using my own tracks. Now obviously it's not the same thing, but maybe I'll do another video eventually using some reference tracks that I can use just to show this. Now I'll only hear the higher frequencies from the side. And could do the same thing for the lows. So if, for example, I'm working on the lows in the sides, I'll actually hear, oh yeah, this track have much more lows than the references I'm using. I'll use a shelf or a bell EQ just to focus on where the problem is, and I don't push it very hard because we're in the mastering stage, so you don't want to do crazy EQ moves. It's really something that you learn by doing it yourself and by narrowing down what you're listening to, both on your own tracks and on your reference tracks. It will be much easier to see what's going on in a pro mix so you can apply it to your own tracks. Now, after working on getting a rough EQ on my tracks, I like to try and get some character out of it. Now at this point you can start using maybe less the reference tracks, but if you're not sure about something, just keep looking at them. You have to do some really small moves at this point. The next thing I'm doing on each tracks actually is I'm adding some high end, and I'm using different plugins to do this. You'll see actually the 4 of those are pretty much doing almost the same thing, but since they're not built the same way, they're not targeting the same frequencies, and it helps to get a smoother high end. Very, very subtle, almost not noticeable. And the 3 plugins after this, I'm doing pretty much the same thing, just adding a little bit of high end. We can see here just a little bit, also working the mids just a little bit. Same thing for this one, like a 1 dB boost of the highs and nothing else. And this one, same thing, just working the mids a little bit and a small boost on the highs. And the thing is, since we're using different plugins, they're not targeting exactly the same frequencies, so it helps to get the highs smooth, and it helps just giving some character to the track. So it's really subtle when it's just one plugin at a time, but now we can actually hear the tracks when we engage the 4 plugins. It just gets a bit cleaner, a bit smoother, a bit clearer. And then what I'm adding is this limiter. I'm just getting the very peaks of the track with this one. So really just grabbing the occasional peaks. Now there was quite a bit of information, but we're almost done at this point. All songs have very similar treatment, and we're just making sure that we're keeping everything under control. Now the next step is where we'll make everything cohesive together. If you remember at the start of the video, I said that I'm grouping every track to a master bus, and what I'm going to do is use this master bus to make every track have something that they share together. So now for the master group, the first thing I'm going to add is a compressor with a fast attack and a slow release. I'm just trying to glue everything together and just keep everything under control. And you can see it's not working a lot, really small compression going on. Next thing I'm doing, I'm just using a bunch of different saturation plugins. Actually, most of them are not even doing anything and they're just there to give some character. For example, this one, I just put it there, left it at 0, not doing anything, but it's still giving some saturation and some color to the sound. Same thing for this one, like 2% on the saturation knob, just very small moves. This one, same thing. This one, same thing. Although this one, I'm pushing it a bit more, but I'm using the wet dry knob and I'm blending it 6%, so really subtle. And we can see without the saturation and with the saturation. So it's already kind of gluing everything. The next thing I'm doing, I'm adding a limiter, and I'll add actually layers of limiting. The first one, I'm just grabbing some hard peaks and releasing them pretty quickly. And then after this, I'm using an EQ. I'm using this, you can see it's kind of a weird EQ, but it's actually just for a dithering reason. Next up, I added 2 limiters, but it's just for the video. I actually just have one of them engaged at a time. So we can look it up. It's the finishing limiter, so that's where I'm adding a dither, and that's also where I'm getting my final level. So I like to go minus 0.7 dB. Some people like to go -1, -0.1. Now at this point, this pretty much covers the whole mastering chain, and if you're not sure about something I was saying in the video, it might be a good idea to just go back and check it out again. Alright, this probably was a bit more of a lengthy video, but I think this will cover pretty much all you need to know if you want to do a very basic mastering for your projects. We're almost done in this small video series, so the next steps will actually cover stuff that's not as audio related than the actual first videos we've released. We're going to talk about artwork and distribution. Alright, thanks so much for staying around, and I'll see you next week, where we work on the EP's artwork.